This is now turning into a disaster. And this is a major problem because now the United States and Iran are getting into it. The United States has proved that Iranian-backed groups were part of the attacks on U.S. troops in the Middle East, where more than 20 people were injured. Then the United States decided to perform 2 airstrikes on parts of Syria because of Iranian groups. Now what's happening is President Biden and Iranian officials are going back and forth. Here's what President Biden had to say. President Biden warns of response of Iran attacks on U.S. troops. Well, what does this mean? Well, President Biden said that the United States is not going to back down. Even Secretary of Defense Blinken told Iran that they will take action. The United States is not going to back down no matter what. And this is turning into a problem. Then Iran comes out and they warn the U.S. is not going to be spared if Israel and the Gaza war spreads. They're firing back at President Biden. But what's interesting about all this is they are doing this on U.S. soil. Okay? This is what happened this week. This was in New York.
The history of Iranian civilization shows that we have always supported peace and security. But today in New York and the United Nations, I say frankly to the American statesmen who are now managing the genocide in Palestine that we do not welcome to expansion of the war in the region. But I warn, if the genocide in Gaza continues, they will not be spared from this fire.
So what he just said, I want to go back and read this for you. Okay? So what he said, see it right here. He says, today in New York and the United Nations, I say frankly to the American statesmen who are now managing the genocide in Palestine that we do not welcome an expansion of the war in the region. But I warn, if the genocide in Gaza continues, they will not be spared from these fires. The Iranian foreign minister, threatened the United States on U.S. soil. So this is where things are going, and this is where it is potentially going to turn into a very serious situation. Now, I want to read you some more of this article. This is from Bloomberg. Okay, look at this. It says the U.S. has also seen an uptick in attacks on American forces based in Syria and Iraq, saying 21 Americans have suffered light injuries in a spate of drone and rocket attacks since October 17th. U.S. officials say they told Tehran responsible. They hold Tehran responsible. It says, we know that these groups are groups that are backed by Iran. We don't necessarily see that Iran has explicitly ordered them to take these kinds of attacks. That said, by virtue of the fact that they are supported by Iran, we will ultimately hold Iran responsible. What's interesting about this is not only does the United States hold Iran responsible for groups that they are funding, Iran is holding the United States responsible for groups that we are funding. Interesting. It goes on to say, at the UN Security Council this week, Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned that the U.S. would respond decisively if Iran or its proxies attacked Americans. The sternest warning yet, as the Biden administration tries to keep Tehran from joining the war between Israel and Hamas. That is where things get very interesting. The United States is trying to prevent another group from joining the war, yet the United States is also somewhat putting itself in the middle because we are funding Israel. We're also providing humanitarian relief for Israel and Gaza. So we're helping one group, one country try to win over the other, but yet we're funding both of them, trying to make sure they have food and water and other things like that. It's an interesting turn of events. It goes on to say, down here at the end, the Biden administration is sending more forces into the Middle East, including 2 aircraft carrier groups, additional fighter jets, and missile defense systems. The U.S. says the moves are aimed at making adversaries such as Iran think twice before joining the conflict, but they have also provoked fears that the U.S. will bring about the outcomes it seeks to avoid by expanding its presence in a volatile situation. And that's essentially true. What other countries don't want, especially Iran doesn't want the U.S. coming in and expanding this, making this bigger than what it is. But again, it's a very interesting turn of events. But here's where things get very interesting. There are other groups as well, and I talked about this the other day. I even showed you a picture of what we saw where another country was shooting missiles into Israel, and the United States has had to use their U.S. carrier in the Red Sea in order to shoot down the missiles. Well, what happened was, and again, this is why it's so interesting, there's another group. They're called the Houthis, okay? And they are now becoming a threat to Israel and the U.S. because of this Gaza war. And the reason for this is because the Houthis have the ability to strike the shipping in the Red Sea. And guess where a lot of stuff is coming through? The Red Sea. So because of that, and that's also where we're keeping some military equipment and ships, they're sitting in the Red Sea. Well, if the Houthis can now attack U.S. carriers, again, this is an Iranian-backed group. So it's not just Iran attacking the United States or the United States attacking Iran. It's the United States is funding Israel, or is going to fund Israel, sending equipment and stuff like that. But as they consider that assistance, Iran does, well, then now they're looking at the United States as a threat. Same thing goes for the United States. When Iran is not necessarily calling the shots or anything, but they are funding certain groups, they're backing these different groups that are anti-American. Well, now the United States and President Biden says, well, they are essentially attacking us. So this is where things get very, very complicated, but at the same time, it's a very sticky situation because we are now in the middle of it. We are now in the middle of this war. This is why many are saying that this is going to be World War III, because everybody's fighting. And here's the other issue. We could see inflation shoot up here in the United States because OPEC, which Iran is part of, OPEC provides over 15% of our oil here in the United States. Canada provides quite a bit. Saudi Arabia, quite a bit as well. They are part of OPEC as well. So Iran could say, you know what? We don't need to be sending oil to the United States. And if that creates a bigger conflict with OPEC, which right now they keep on reducing the amount of oil they're producing simply because they want to bring prices up. Well, prices were going down. So that could impact the United States. That could impact every single one of us. The other thing that you got to keep in mind is that right now, the United States is struggling just with our own stuff, right? So this has nothing to do with other countries, but we are struggling within with just funding our own government. But if we are struggling to fund our own government and there's other issues here within our borders we need to address, but now we have this war that we have to fund, but we just don't have the money to fund it, guess what? We're going to cut the priorities here at home so that we can fund that war. The other thing is, right now we've been sending a lot of our equipment, a lot of our munitions over to Ukraine. Well, it's creating a problem because we are sending over a lot of our stockpile, but we haven't been producing enough. We've been using more than we're producing, so now our stockpile is dwindling. Well, if China knows about this and China understands, well, okay, now that their stockpile is very low, now we can go take over Taiwan. We can go get Taiwan. Because what's the U.S. going to do? That's where things are at. So I just bring this up because we are now being threatened on U.S. soil. This is where things get interesting. This is why I tell you that you need to be prepared. So, that is what we know at this time. As always, as we know more, I promise I'll come back on and share all the latest news and updates. But again, thank you guys for watching. Consider subscribing. I'll see you guys on the next one.